Everyone, thanks for joining. We're just going to give it a few more minutes and let people trickle in and we'll get started. People joining, we're just going to take a couple of minutes, let people join, and we'll get started today. All right, we'll give it just one more minute and we'll jump in and get started. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in to our webinar. My name is Zach Atia. I am the head of partnerships at Zeguro, and I have the pleasure of being joined by Jesse Dean, Vice President of Solutions at TDI. We're going to get into a little bit about ourselves in a second, but I just wanted to quickly give an overview of what we're going to be talking about today. So today we're talking about insight-driven cybersecurity. And I think we all know there are a lot of different tools out there that can help you manage and mitigate cyber risk. But what do they all do and how well do they do it, right? So today we're going to be focusing on the how well versus the how much, right? So real quick, I'm going to let Jesse Dean talk a little bit about himself and introduce himself. Go ahead, Jesse.
Great, thanks, Zach. So excited to be here. Appreciate the opportunity. This is something that is very near and dear to my heart. There's a big bio there. You don't have to read all that. I'll quickly summarize. Essentially 18 years plus in the cybersecurity and IT ops software development space, spanning commercial clients, civilian, you name it, all sorts of different companies you've heard of, some you haven't. Right now, my focus is primarily at TDI, a small cybersecurity company based in Washington, DC, where I work with customers to help them understand the benefits of their current cybersecurity policies and really to get more out of what they're doing. And we'll be getting into how that works, or at least a path that I like and Zach understands and appreciates. And Quickly on the partnership, I know Zach will probably touch on that, but very pleased to have a partnership with Zeguro. I think one of the shared visions that we have is we're really about helping and empowering customers in doing better, right? It's not just a matter of, hey, buy this thing and we'll give you this widget. It's more of, hey, let's work together to get better and understand what we need to do just through visibility and ownership and accountability. All topics that mean a lot to both companies, and we'll be getting into a bit here as well.
Thanks, Jesse. And as I mentioned, my name is Zach Attia, head of partnerships at Zeguro. My academic background is in cybersecurity management and policy, but I've spent my entire professional career in cyber insurance. So kind of a both worlds brain thing going on with what we are doing here today. I've held positions at some of the largest insurance companies in the world, both on the brokerage side and on the insurance carrier and underwriting side. So quite a bit of breadth of experience on the cyber risk management side. And as Jesse mentioned, the partnership that we've really built is meant to help small and mid-sized businesses understand and quantify their cyber risk and address that through various risk management vehicles. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today, and we'll get started here. So what is insight-driven cybersecurity? Well, I'm going to leave that to Jesse because he is the cybersecurity insight guy. So what exactly are we talking about here when it comes to insight-driven cybersecurity?
Yeah, no, fair question. And I think a lot of folks may have never heard of this before. And what it is, it's really a simple way to look at taking the pieces that are already being performed by an organization and making sense of it. You see ROI, maturity, reduce risk, all good buzzwords that have been around for quite some time, but have been pretty elusive. So how do we better understand how our security is operationalized to really tease out a better understanding of risk and maturity and ROI? And so to make it not so much as that pie in the sky vision, as opposed to let's make that a reality.
Sure, yeah, and I think a lot of organizations, unfortunately, have been guilty of the checking of the box aspect of cybersecurity, which is probably a good segue to our next slide here, right? Asking the right questions. So, maybe at a high level, Jesse, let's talk about, and at least in your opinion, where are we at in cybersecurity as an industry and as a sector, and what do you see as room for improvement?
Sure, fair question. I tell you what, I don't want to be disparaging. I mean, the industry itself and everyone's been working very hard. There's been a lot of new technology and innovation in terms of frameworks, MITRE ATT&CK, the list goes on and on. So not saying that the industry hasn't advanced. I guess my question is really, are we doing the right things, or are organizations spending in the right areas, or thinking about security the right way? I mean, if you think of cybersecurity compared to, say, finance or project management, those fields have been around significantly longer. So as an example, you go into a boardroom in any corporation anywhere in the world, and a balance sheet, profit and loss statement, and that means pretty much the same thing wherever you go. Whereas you have a board discussion around cybersecurity, those will vary dramatically depending on where you are in the world. So what we're trying to do at TDI and with Zeguro and some other key partners is change that conversation and get away from the activity-based concept of, hey, we're really busy, we're putting out fires, look at all the cool tools we have, look at all the great frameworks, good stuff. But if we think about it more of how do we measure performance and then achieve more with what we have. So it's really that Coach John Wooden approach, where it's not just activity, but it's achievement. So let's not mistake the one for the other. And then with that approach, how much security do we need? What's our current level of protection? Those are all next level type questions that we can really start to answer. And we'll hit on, like we've already teased in the beginning with, how does that impact ROI? How do you derive a better understanding of risk from this type of approach? How do you mature as an organization? So different way to ask, I guess, similar questions. And it's a maturity, different, like a project management or a management of cybersecurity is really the bottom line. And we need to do a better job of managing it, not having the ball play us if you're baseball fans, but really playing the ball and getting ahead of the curve.
sounds like a transition more so than anything else from, that activity-based cybersecurity that you mentioned to maybe more of an outcome-based approach to cybersecurity. And for a lot of organizations, that outcome might be not having a breach, right? But that only works well when you can anticipate everything. And unfortunately, there's not very much you can anticipate in the world of cybersecurity. And sometimes it may not actually even come down to technology, right? I think there are probably other ways that you can address cyber risk.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's people, there's process, so many things other than tools, right? I mean, tools seem to get the attention, but a lot of people can make gains if they focus on people and process as well. And I mean, it's a question for you, Zach. I mean, what do you see as the biggest opportunities for organizations to protect themselves? I mean, looking at that people and process component.
Yeah, sure. So at least what we've seen in Zeguro, right? I mean, this is a real problem for SMBs, right? I mean, 69% of SMBs have been breached. The average cost of a breach is upwards of 3 million, almost $3.6 million. And what we've seen in a lot of that activity is there's not enough stress on the people and processes part of cybersecurity. So at least for us, when it comes to the people, it's setting those guidelines, right? So processes help create those guidelines for individuals, right? Set expectations for departments, for employees. And once they have that frame of reference of what they maybe should and shouldn't do, you should really provide them with education, right? So a transition from processes to education, right? Security awareness training. And so that's really what we've taken under our wings at Zeguro, is really focusing on the people and the processes, and giving them and the tools and setting the expectations so that they're able to operate more securely in their everyday lives.
Yeah, that makes sense. And we're throwing out stats. I'll throw out another one for you. I'm sure you know, Cisco put something out not that long ago. Successful spear phishing attacks account for 95% of the breaches. So, I mean, there you have it, right?
Yeah. And, speaking of our clients, right, and especially the ones that we've spoken to, a lot of the conversations really start with compliance, right? I mean, compliance is great. And we talked about frameworks, right? We talked about processes, and compliance and becoming compliant is a process, right? And some of the people on this call may have gone through the grueling process of becoming compliant. But I feel like there's maybe too much of a focus on compliance, as if compliance equals security. Do you find that equation to be true? And have your clients stated similar frames of reference for the role that security and compliance has?
Yeah, most definitely. And in my background, I do have a little bit of compliance history, fortunately or unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, it's a great first step, and I think it's the industry or government's way, organizational type policy way of, hey, we got to start paying attention to what's going on here. So certainly not security. I think organizations, some are better than others of understanding that. But yeah, it's definitely not security. I mean, what it is when it's done right, and it's not always done right. I mean, it's a decent risk management tool, but there are limitations, right? I mean, it's a point in time. Many people treat it as a checkbox, like you said, and it's usually a low cost type exercise where organizations don't want to spend any more than they have to. And if it comes with a nice certificate to hang on the wall and it's the low cost option, sure, why not, right? It's a very short-sighted approach. I think organizations are getting better about understanding that. Like I said, a great first step, but there has to be more to the equation than that. The other piece, kind of talking a little bit to this slide here, is this disconnect, this divide where, hey, yeah, we are beholden to certain regulatory policies. Hey, we should probably do them, right? So what people end up doing on the right, how are they operationalizing them? So they spend a ton of money on tools, different teams, different parts of their environment, different pieces of inventory. It's a mess, right? It's very hard. It's very complex. Certainly not easy at all. But the bottom line, it gets lost, right, in translation, where people can't answer those key outcomes on the left, because that's the bottom, right? Hey, based on my risk assessment, based on my risk appetite, I know I'm doing some of these things, I'm checking a box, but really, am I scanning my crown jewels assets? Are they being protected? Are they being patched? Is MFA enabled? It's just those basic things that you really need to understand as an organization continuously. It's not just the point in time. I have an assertion from some audit agency 3, 4, or 5 months ago, but that doesn't do too much. It's great, but it's not what organizations need, especially as we look into the future. So really what we're proposing here is the type of a mindset is really understand what's going on from an operational perspective, have that visibility to drive performance and maturity. And, as you'll see in the coming slides, and you're starting to get a feel for, having these operational insights goes such a long way in maturing the organization and really informing risk. So I really can't say enough about that.
Sure. And, and speaking about compliance, right, with exception for a couple of industries and perhaps operation types, a lot of organizations don't necessarily have to become compliant, right? And actually, one of the most astounding examples of that, in my opinion, has been with government contracting, especially within the defense industrial base, where previously, in order to qualify for a certain contract, you had to be compliant with DFARS and NIST 800-171. And a lot of that was self-attestation, right? Which is great to a degree, but I think especially what we've seen in the activity in the defense industrial base and some of the changes and the graduation of compliance into the CMMC framework that has arisen and been established in the last couple of years, is that self-attestation just doesn't work, right? And unfortunately, businesses, they want to get the revenue, right? And I totally understand that, right? Because that's what really keeps everybody going. And, the claims that we've seen in the government contracting space and the number of data breaches that have occurred, it really woke the government up, especially in the Department of Homeland Security. And so these new requirements where a third-party assessor has to come in and actually verify and audit you to make sure that you're compliant with the 170 odd controls for cybersecurity, I think is really a testament to self-attestation doesn't work, right? People are going to say that they're compliant so they can win a contract. So personally, I know there's a lot of clout around whether or not, the CMMC framework is important, but I think it's really setting a guideline and probably a standard for years to come of what organizations should expect. And I really think at some point, most organizations are going to have to be compliant from a regulatory perspective. And states are doing it themselves too, right? With CCPA out of California and the EU with GDPR, right? They're forcing this compliance and these requirements to be fulfilled in order for you to protect the information of individuals, right? So compliance isn't the end all be all, no, but it definitely helps organizations get started on the right track.
Yep, exactly. And I think that the next step to all that is the continuous monitoring component too. And you're seeing some tools such as BitSight. I mean, they take an external view of an organization's security, and that's again a good first step. But there's so much, as you know, as far as internal facing concerns that need to be understood and tracked. So, I'm curious, Zach. When we talk about insurance companies and compliance, I know there's some value that they place there when they're performing the underwriting, but is that tenable as industry looks ahead, just to say, I'm going to take your compliance as good enough when I set that policy? Or do you see continuous monitoring going to be a bigger factor in the years ahead?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to go through the entire life cycle process of the placement of insurance, save that for another day. But when someone fills out an application for cyber insurance, that application is really you brought up point in time, right? Assessment. That's what an insurance application is, for better or for worse. It's at that point in time, do they have these various security controls in place? Are they compliant with any frameworks, right? And most insurance applications list a plethora of compliance frameworks, and you simply just check which ones you're compliant with. Well, 6 months, a year, several years could go by and you don't have any claims, but let's say you transition some of your business activities so that you don't need to be compliant with a certain framework. Well, that insurance company is still thinking that you're compliant with a certain framework, and should a claim arise, I mean, that could be problematic, right? When you have attested that you're compliant with a certain framework and it's discovered that you're not. I can't comment on the way the claims process will go from there, but I can say it may not end up turning out very well. Insurance companies, especially in the cyber insurance space, do have a pretty good reputation of paying claims. So I will say that, but I do think that continuous monitoring is important, and that's actually one of the things that we've instituted at Zeguro is at least consistent monitoring of a couple different threat factors, and helps us drive our underwriting decisions. So one of the reasons why we love our partnership with CNSide is because we're afforded some of those insights on a continuous basis. So continuous monitoring, I think, is a must-have and will continue to be as the cyber insurance market evolves. And I couldn't wait to get to this slide, to be honest, because coming from the cyber insurance and cyber risk background, I'm a firm believer that cyber risk is business risk. And I feel like this slide does a really good job of highlighting that. And partially because I think there's been a big shift, or hopefully there is a big shift. If it hasn't happened already, I think it will become mainstream in the next few years, is that more individuals need to get involved in the cyber risk management process, right? And I'm not saying that the CFO needs to know the ins and outs of cybersecurity, but I think there definitely needs to be engagement. And I'm curious to know from your end, what does successful engagement of senior leadership look like in the cyber risk management process?
Yeah, good question. Well, they definitely have to own it, senior leadership. I mean, I'm sure some of the audience, you've heard of CARE, but just that approach to be consistent, adequate, reasonable, effective, is that the security program that's in place? You don't have to do everything, but consistent, adequate, reasonable, effectiveness. Those four tenets are huge. And how do you understand that? How do you communicate that? And part of it is with continuous monitoring. It's having that visibility across the organization, so people who are responsible can take action. It's no longer enough just to trust the cybersecurity wizard or some audit findings. It's trust but verify, in getting everyone on the same page. There was a study out of Stanford a couple of years ago about the importance of KPIs, key performance indicators, and what the study explained and what they found was that those organizations, those management teams that used KPIs were up to 20% more effective in how they manage their business in terms of output than those teams that had more technology, that had larger investments in R&D and larger team size. So if you take that logic and you apply it to cybersecurity, where you don't have to buy more tools, you don't have to spend more R&D, you don't have to hire more people. There's a huge, 3 million, I think, shortfall of cybersecurity talent right now. But no, let's manage it better. Let's apply some key performance indicators. Let's automate that so the CFO can get what he needs to really understand the ROI. So we can finally answer those questions around governance. Are we truly compliant? Not just the point in time view. How well are we doing? Use that logic to manage MSSPs, where that's no longer a thing you can do as an organization, is just outsource your risk and say, you know what, someone else is doing it. Yeah, in some regard, but you got to manage them, manage those SLAs, make sure that they're patching within those timelines, you're getting what you need from them to be smart. And all sorts of other questions, the board's asking, ransomware, are we effective in guarding against this? Is MFA in place? How is our phishing exercises? How do those, say, controls, if you will, or KPIs roll up to those overarching headlines that executives ask about and care about? And then with all of this, that's your common nomenclature. That's how everyone talks consistently, that shared lexicon, where it's not, well, who cares about this vulnerability or that, or this many things have been patched. I mean, that's not really a business conversation, but how do you tie that to what business cares about? So this framework that we're talking about here really helps aid in those conversations, where people at all levels of the organization can essentially row together to advance where they are relative to their effectiveness and their cybersecurity posture.
I love that concept of a shared lexicon, right? Because let's face it, for the cybersecurity individuals on here, you have to admit there's a lot of jargon in our industry, and we have a habit of maybe tossing it around when we shouldn't, right? So I think that's why it's so important when you're communicating cybersecurity performance, you're doing that in a coherent way so that everyone that's involved in the buying process and the risk management process can actually understand what's going on, right?
Mhm.
Everyone in the senior leadership circle has a responsibility for helping and maintaining cybersecurity. And specifically from the insurance standpoint, looking at the CFO or the CRO, typically those are the two individuals that are handling the insurance. Cyber insurance is meant to address residual risk, right? So the better an organization can communicate where that residual risk exists to the CFO and the CRO, then they're able to do their jobs better. So I think that this is where the focus needs to be. And that's why cyber risk is business risk, right? Because if you can communicate better, then you're able to better address your risk and you can transfer that risk, right? Cybersecurity experts, if most people that have their Security Plus certification should at least know that there's various types of risk management. There's risk avoidance, right? Not doing something, risk mitigation, lowering the chances of something happening. But the most common overlooked aspect of risk management is risk transfer, right? And that's what insurance does. So insurance plays a critical part of the process. And the better that we can empower the individuals involved in that buying process, the better outcomes you'll have and the more protected you'll be, either financially or from a security standpoint.
Yeah, exactly. And you answered the question I was going to ask you. I don't know if you want to add any more to that, but I was just wondering if there's any other benefit that organizations can derive from having that visibility and accountability.
Yeah, I mean, not only are organizations able to, better facilitate the insurance, right? Understanding what insurance will help them the best, but also that could help drive their insurance costs, right? So the better you are at communicating what your posture is to the insurance companies, the better they'll understand your risk, right? And they can provide you better coverage. But at the same time, if you do have these controls, right? So we talked about the how much earlier, right? Versus the how well. It's a little bit of a dance between both, right? How much does matter, right? And you need to be able to measure for your own good how well it's performing. But insurance companies do want to see what you have, right? Do you have multi-factor authentication, right? Do you have endpoint detection? Do you have managed detection and response services? All that stuff is really important. And if you can communicate that and show insurance companies that you have that, then they're going to give you better rates on your insurance as well. So it really is a nice little song and dance in between the how well you do it and how much you actually have. So with that, it's really important to assess what an organization's risk is. But I really feel like in our conversations with you, Jesse, the insight from TDI has kind of taken that a step further in the analysis of the security stack of an organization. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what the benefits are.
Yeah, another good one. I'd say it really provides focus, right? So organizations can't do it all, right? Just limited resources. We all get that. So it really makes them focus, or they should focus on what's really needed, right? Through that risk assessment, what's in place, and then finally, see how effective that is, how well those safeguards, whether that's tools, teams, or processes, are performing. So that's really where that insight type approach makes sense, where you're focusing the organization. You can't boil the ocean, right? Overused cliches, but how do you go about it, right? We've seen organizations where they had a huge Rapid7 deployment, and we found out that the management of that and their deployment was faulty. They were only scanning 73% of their assets. They were spending a ton of money, and they didn't know they had these blind spots. And all of that feeds into risk. So if you're under the impression as the CRO or CIO or board that, hey, I'm spending millions of dollars on this tool and the team, and oh, I guess I'm not scanning, what? Okay, well, you know what? You don't have to rely on spreadsheets anymore. You don't have to rely on the teams to self-report. Let them focus on doing real security things and not building spreadsheets and reports for the CISO and others. So that's really where we come in. We like to see organizations start small and work their way up. I think a lot of people get or are enamored with the latest in AI and machine learning. All of those are phenomenal things, but if you don't understand your inventory, or you don't know if you're patching everything, or you don't know how many users have MFA enabled, or you don't have basic security training, just those basic things. Look at the CIS top 5, for example. I think it's an 18, top 18, no longer a top 20. But start at the top 5. Give yourself a little assessment, see where you are there. Certainly, you need to protect against nation states and have some threat hunters, depending on your organization. But if you're not patching, you don't know what's on your network, start there.
Yeah, I think that's a really important part of the process. And I have a couple of buddies, obviously, that work in the security consulting space. And they say that one of their favorite questions when an organization that they have first started working with is talking about all the technologies that they buy, one of the first questions that they like to ask is why? Why do you have this technology or that technology? And the answers are never really clear, right? And I think it's because they haven't gone through that upfront, baseline analysis of, what are their crown jewels, right? Like, what are you even protecting, right? There's a lot of focus on protecting the organization, right? And every cybersecurity tool typically, in some form or fashion advertises that they're protecting your organization, and they are, right? There's a lot of great stuff out there, but you got to dig deeper than that. And the analysis and being able to establish metrics and a baseline is really important. So if you look at the cybersecurity process in 3, broad categories, right? There's the assessment, and there's the mitigation, right? And then the assurance or the insurance. And the assessment is what CNSide, I think, does the best. But what that will allow you to do is better mitigate in the future, right? And then assurance for me is kind of that insurance piece, right? That last layer of protection, and that really is kind of a financial and logistical protection, right? So in the event of a breach, you have these resources available, and an entire data breach team will come and remedy the situation or the incident. But all of that is more effectively done. So when you are breached, all that relies on your assessment of yourself, right? Because you can more effectively communicate what you have and what could have been breached, right? So whether it's mitigation or it's response, everything relies on a coherent and clear assessment process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious, what other steps do you talk to your clients about, when they're looking to, say, right size, small, medium organizations, you can't do it all, right? So, what types of advice do you give your clients?
I feel like we've talked about a little bit of this already, and I do want to save some time for questions, so I'll keep it short. Really bringing it back to the processes and the people, right? Look at what processes you have in place, assessment being, one of those. But also taking a look at how you train employees, what are you giving them, right? And for me, we've done a lot of customer interviews and employee interviews for those that use our training platform. And one of my favorite stories is the mother that was able to go home to her kids and share all this cybersecurity knowledge that she's learning through our employee awareness training in cybersecurity. She's actually making not only her business more secure, but her entire home ecosystem more secure, right? And her teenage kids are like, "Mom, I didn't even know you knew how to send an email or a text message, but you're coming home and sharing all this information with us." So there's a lot of good to be had from starting with the people, and I'm a people person, and Jeff, you are too. So I can really appreciate the people aspect of cybersecurity. I mean, RSA had a whole conference on it. I think in 2020, it was based on the human element, right? So the cybersecurity industry knows people are important.
Yes.
So I do want to open it up for questions. We have a couple here already, but I want to be able to answer some from the audience. Louis, do we have any questions that have come in from the audience?
Yes, we do. For Jesse, based on your experience, what are the 1 or 2 top challenges a company faces when starting to gain more visibility into their cybersecurity?
Ooh. There's so many. Top 2. Maybe trying to do too much. Hit on this one a little bit earlier, where people are excited to understand maybe some of the harder areas or all of the areas within their environment. And I usually steer them back to the basics, because one, it's easier, right? And 2, it's more important, meaning if you go back to that CIS model, having the building blocks of inventory and vulnerability management. So not trying to do too much, and you will get overwhelmed by the data in terms of, wow, I don't even know what to do with all this, or we have so much to do in terms of the response and trying to fix things, if you will. So start small, do one thing at a time, maybe add another along the way, and just take a systematic approach to it. And that's usually the best way to go. The other one would be around culture. A lot of people, I'll say a lot, I don't want to overgeneralize, but there is a tendency for people to say, my organization is good. That's not a problem for us here. And a couple of reasons why. The primary one, you have a leader in the organization that's been telling a story or a narrative around security, and it's usually activity based, right? I just submitted a business case to get Splunk and it was expensive. So now I have to make sure that I'm communicating to the board that they're getting the value out of it. They may not know that it's been tough to hire people, or Splunk forwarders aren't 100% working yet, or we're not capturing all the logs, or whatever it is. Those things are very complex and hard. But when you talk to organizations about, hey, why don't you take more of a performance view and really institute what we're talking about here today, there can be some pushback, because that narrative, they don't want to know, right? That plausible deniability is the other aspect of it, and then two, it may run counter to the story that they've been telling internally.
Those are extremely great points too. And then I think one for Zach. If you had to choose to spend money between cyber insurance or cybersecurity, which one would you recommend?
Oh boy, that's a loaded question. I have to say, first off, you can't really negotiate in between the two. I hate to be that guy, but it's got to be both. I think there is an argument in cyber insurance in that there is a lot of return on security investment, but you typically don't see that until you've actually had a breach, right? And it's meant to address that residual risk, right? And if you have a lot of residual risk, then it's going to cost you more money to address it with cyber insurance, right? So that's why you need to have cybersecurity in place, so that you can try to limit that residual risk, but lowering your overall expense on the cyber insurance side. And cybersecurity, it really can help you even from like an elementary level. And cybersecurity, and we've looked at this today, it means a lot of things, right? Even employee training, even having processes in place. So, maybe it wouldn't hurt to look for a cyber insurance provider that does offer cybersecurity tools as part of their suite of offerings, right? Some offer for free, some offer discounts. But I think it's really important to say that they work hand in hand and in tandem with each other, so that it will provide a certain level of protection and prevention up front, but then offers that financial and logistical security in the event of a breach.
Awesome. And I think that was pretty much all the questions that we currently have on our list, but there was one that was sent via email that states, do we need to train all of our employees or just a set or any departments? Would you like to add a little bit on that?
I'll also let Jesse contribute to this one, because I know that they do some level of measurement, but best case scenario is obviously yes, you should train all of your employees, because it's the weakest link, unfortunately. That is what threat actors take advantage of, right? The untrained employee. But if you're really looking at who could benefit the most, I do have a little bit of a sales background. I mean, unfortunately, salespeople have a little bit of a habit of trying to run and try to bring in as much business as possible. There is a privacy aspect that must be respected, and making sure that they're aware and compliant with not sharing confidential information or oversharing information, whether it's third-party corporate data or any sort of personal information. The accounting department, a lot of small and mid-sized businesses have gotten hammered by phishing attacks. Jesse had talked about spear phishing earlier today. Making sure that there's no chance that someone in the accounting team has the singular authority to process payments in excess of maybe 10,000 or 20,000, but whatever that number is, being able to bring a general sense of awareness for potential funds transfer fraud, for example, and phishing. But again, I can't stress enough, all employees really should be trained. Justin, do you have anything to add to that?
No, that covers quite a bit. I would say look at role-based training. Certainly not all roles within the organization require the same amount of training. So I mean, you look at an admin type user that has elevated credentials, probably more training, different types of training as opposed to maybe just a regular user. Phishing is going to be part of probably both of those. And maybe an executive level training too, because they're getting pretty sophisticated in the phishing emails where they understand what level of the organization some of the users are, so they can tailor those messages. So, don't leave the CEO out of those training sessions as well, because they are definitely targets of those types of attacks.
Yeah, great stuff. So I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up from here. I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in today. Once again, Zeguro and CInsight from TDI have partnered together to make insight-driven cybersecurity available for small and mid-sized businesses. So if you have any questions, feel free to email Zeguro, and we'll also provide the deck upon request. So until next time, we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Zach.
Bye. Thanks, Jesse.